Hello, friends. Sorry for a little bit of a late start. It is 6:04 on July 7th, 2020. A year I think all of us are never going to forget, ever. Um, so we had UFC last night. Some absolute insane fights. I don't know if I can even describe how amazing last night's fights were. Um, Headlined by Amanda Nunez, who please, Dana White, stop sending these girls out to get murdered by Amanda Nunez, please. I swear, some of these championship bouts lately with these female fighters has just shown how insanely ahead the champions are from anyone else in their divisions. I think all of them did face tough fights to get um, to get their respective belts, but since they've gotten them, it's not even been close. You could argue that Amanda Nunez hasn't had really any um, haven't had any challenges since obtaining their belts. So I'm trying to bring up the list of last night's fights because I do not remember all of them off the top of my head. I also missed a couple cooking dinner while I was cooking dinner. Um, but I did see most of the highlights on all the fights. Come on now. Good lord. ESPN does not make it easy to look up fight results. Also, the return of Cody Garbrandt. Before TJ Dillashaw knocked him off of his throne, I thought Cody was one of the baddest dudes on this planet. I still think he is now. But after losing twice to TJ the way he did, the following fight after that, that 3 game skid was rough. And they even talked about last night that he had lost his chin, and he absolutely did. He lost his chin. But to come back, this fight wasn't. I wouldn't say it was a cakewalk for him. I think he was in command of that fight, but it was no cakewalk. I missed the Sterling submission. I missed that one. I did see the highlights, missed it. The dude was done. Dude was done. Not even close. Sean O'Malley. Me and Aaron's boy, Sean O'Malley. What a star. This kid, I don't expect someone as young as him to go his entire career um, undefeated. I don't think that's possible in UFC. Boxing's a whole different story. You look at these guys who have gone undefeated, the heavyweights, didn't really face each other. That's the thing is now that they're facing each other, they're losing. I think you could argue that the first Wilder Fury fight could have gone either way. The draw I think was the most least expected outcome, but maybe that's why we get that outcome because you could make the argument either way that the other one had won. And then obviously Floyd Mayweather, who's made a career of just picking people apart. One of, if not the best boxers in the history of boxing. Sean O'Malley is coming out. He says he's not, that he's not out here trying to put on a show, but he absolutely is. He absolutely is putting on one hell of a show. I don't think anyone could argue that. Um, Super exciting to see where this kid's career goes, and he's in one of the deepest divisions. So it'll be really interesting to see as he works his way up. If he avoids injuries, he's not a very big built dude. Part of that plays into his strength of what he can do. because of his build, but he's not built really to sustain heavy beatings, and a lot of his injuries seem self-inflicted. Because of what he does. It doesn't seem like a person of his build should be able to do that, but absolutely lights out power, both from feet, hands, in a submission game. Absolutely insane. And that doesn't even give me all the fights. Okay, Cody, and then Amanda Nunez, Felicia Spencer. Felicia Spencer, heart of a champion. That is why Amanda Nunez put that belt on her at the end of that fight, because Felicia Spencer took an absolute beating, and everyone knows that she knew in round 3 that she was just trying to save herself. But credit to her for actually trying to throw in some counters there, um, staying alive in that fight. A lot of respect there from Amanda Nunez. Saying all the right things that you want to hear, but they've got to stop. There's got to be something. It has to stop about with these fights. The girls that are going into these bouts with these champions, there's money on the line, and that's where the argument will come out that probably um, these fights have to happen. That's how these girls get paid. But Joanna just got absolutely murdered by Zhang, and that was absolutely an actual fight. She felt she won that fight, and she got absolutely abused in that fight. Felicia Spencer was abused in this fight. She is going to feel that beating for a while, and I just hope that this just leads to maybe something else. Maybe Valentina Shevchenko and Amanda Nunez, some way we meet in the middle on the weight there. I just don't see how we can keep sending out some of these women to just, putting up an absolute fight. But, it's been really rough trying to get someone to put up much, against these women, with Joanna, really putting out the best effort. If she would have been awarded that fight, I don't think there would have been as much pushback. But, everyone knows who won that fight, for sure. The return of the NBA. It has been announced that 22 teams will be invited to, I believe, Orlando's Disneyland Resort. And so now we have a little bit of an idea of what we're seeing. I believe they're playing the traditional NBA playoff format, which is top 8 West go out, duke it out with each other, and then the top 8 East with the winners of each conference facing off in the NBA Finals. A little bit disappointing, considering the way this season gone. They really could have gotten creative with how they wanted to finish the season with the playoffs. I really kind of dig the idea of the 1 through 16, because I think we could have had something interesting like Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, Celtics, and any combination of any of that. Not to mention, you never know what could happen with some of the lower parts of the bracket. Some teams could get upset. Definitely anything's on the table this season. I think even the 16th seed could have won the NBA Finals this year. Anything's possible. Injuries, the fitness, strength and conditioning. We're in uncharted times, so it's really impossible to tell how this season could have or would have played out. So with that said, 22 teams, I believe. Let's see, Orlando playoffs. So they have something put together here. And it was announced. I saw a post earlier today that they were going to try and put together some kind of a summer league thing. So I guess guys could come out and play. You saw Trae Young playing pickup basketball a couple days ago in Oklahoma City. So I think some guys, younger guys, would want to do something competitive. These guys normally do during the summer, kicked out early from the playoffs or something. That's where these guys are going to go. And so, with that said, these extra teams that are coming to Orlando to play out these last regular season games, I believe they said there's 8. They're going to play out these last games because they all theoretically had a chance to um, come back and make the playoffs. Had not been eliminated up to that point. So you've got, if these standings are correct, um, Brooklyn, Orlando, and Washington are going to be playing for the last 2 spots. And if I'm seeing this right, Dallas, Memphis, Portland, New Orleans, Sacramento, San Antonio, and Phoenix all come out to play for the last 2 spots in the West. So if that's the case, Phoenix, Devin Booker is my boy, but that team, I think really could have benefited from had they drafted, obviously hindsight, drafting Luka Doncic over DeAndre Ayton. But with that said, I don't think DeAndre Ayton is the worst prospect. I think there's a lot of potential there. I think there's a really good one to punch offensively there, but they really need some defense badly in that team, some veteran presence, and someone I think to take the offensive pressure off of Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. So maybe if they could get a dynamic 1 or 3 in there, maybe would love to see someone like Chris Paul there. I think that could do wonders, but there's no way they can fit him in there, without drastically changing that team. Although you never know. I mean, I'm not a cap expert, and I know teams can get really creative when they need to. Sacramento, there's talent on that team. I just don't think that it's built for success. I think they have a really good 1-2 in Buddy Hield and De'Aaron Fox, but the team's not really high on Buddy Hield, and there's rumors that he may leave this offseason. So, I don't really know what's going on and what the future is like in Sacramento. I think that they do trade Buddy Hield this offseason to a team that's looking for a number 3, maybe Los Angeles Lakers. I don't know who the Lakers give up. I think the Kings would like to get Kyle Kuzma back in that deal because he makes a really good, number 3 or a 6th man off the bench. So I think that makes sense from the Kings standpoint, considering you've got a really good 1-2 and the De'Aaron Fox and Bogdanovich. So, not a team that I'm real high on this year, but might have potential depending on what Luke Walton is as a coach and what that front office can do for that squad. New Orleans Pelicans, I think everyone knows why this expanded invitation to Orlando happened is mostly because the New Orleans Pelicans were 4 games out of the 8 spot and still had quite a few regular season games to go that we were going to see Zion Williams. So they want to make up that revenue. And if there's, if this is how the Pelicans can squeak in, which everyone healthy, 8 games to go, they have 4 to make up. They have an uphill battle because they're really only playing for that 1 spot. Dallas all but has the 7th spot locked up. In fact, I'm not even sure how it is. They'd have to lose every single game, and even still, no, yeah, if they lost it, they don't have to lose every single game, but geez, 8 games to make up between 7 and 8. So, Portland, disappointing. I think they have an absolute squad there. I don't know what's not gelling there. If it's, I know injuries have been a problem, but when you have a deep team like that, even in a deep conference like the West, how you're unable to make that work, considering you were in the Western Conference Finals not a couple years ago. You have probably one of the most clutch shooters in Damian Lillard, an absolute star in this league, with CJ McCollum as his Robin. A lot of good stuff cooking there in Portland. I don't know what they're missing. I really don't. Does that come down to coaching? Is that the difference maker? Memphis has the 8 spot right now. I would be really surprised if anyone was able to catch or pass them up. I think that they have something going there. I think they would have rather had this happen next year, get another high pick. But the draft coming up is not very deep, and maybe that's what they saw. Maybe that's why they've been as aggressive as possible to push for the playoffs this year. But a lot of these rebuilds take multiple years to cultivate into something special. And I think only coming out of a rebuild with 1 star or 1 star and 1 or 2 good, not all star players, I think that's a failed rebuild. I think you might see Atlanta go through some growing pains here. They've had a couple drafts now picking high. They've traded other players for draft capital. Yet here we are. They're 20-47, and will they come out of this rebuild with more than 1 star, more than just Trae Young? I know you'll hear people speak really highly of those players there, but I think you won't find many people outside of Atlanta who know much about them. So maybe this is one of those sleeper Oklahoma City situations back when KD, Westbrook, and Harden kind of took the NBA by storm after being a promising but underachieving young team. And Dallas, number in the 7th spot, all but has a spot locked up. I am really excited to see what Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis can do, because I think that is a really lethal 1-2 combination. 2 guys that are virtually unstoppable. We would say top 5 in their position at their peaks in their offensive craft, and I think it's very reminiscent of the Steve Nash Dirk Nowitzki combination. Although you might say that these both have opportunities to be as good or better as those players in their positions. And then over, did we talk about the East? The East, the Wizards. So I guess it's over here. It's Brooklyn, Orlando, and Washington. Although Washington 6 games out with 8 to go. Orlando right now in the 8th spot. Brooklyn in the 7th spot. Only a half game separating them. The Brooklyn Nets are not getting KD or Kyrie back. That's pretty much been confirmed by Kevin Durant. We haven't heard from Kyrie, but word is that shares the same sentiment. But they're not coming back. I applaud their decision. Get healthy. There's no guarantee that this was going to be the year that they would win it. There's that. If they're both 100% healthy, then obviously, yeah, they have a shot to win it. But if they're not 100, which Kyrie's not, Kyrie's having surgery, I hear. KD, what is he coming back to lead this squad by himself? They're not winning if it's just KD, even if he is 100%. So they both rest. They both get a full off season. I guarantee you, Kevin Durant comes back next year and has an MVP caliber. I will take the odds as soon as possible for Kevin Durant to win the MVP next year. I think he'll come back with a lot to prove. I think even playing next to Kyrie, who demands his fair share of the spotlight, he'll still have an MVP caliber season, and likely win that award. I think he will come back with a chip on his shoulder. Orlando, that's a team that's in a really bad middle ground. I don't know what you do there. They have not hit on very many of their recent picks. It's not gelling there. They're floating the idea of moving Aaron Gordon, which I think would benefit Aaron Gordon really well. I'd love to see him end up in a really good situation like maybe Phoenix or maybe Minnesota. 2 teams that could really use his athleticism, dynamic scoring ability, and what he brings for TV ratings, obviously. And then the Wizards, I assume this is just because math is why they're being invited. Um, the Wizards is a one-man show. Bradley Beal, who I think is an amazingly efficient player, an absolute star. I'd love to see him go to a better situation as well. The at the beginning of the quarantine, word comes out that the Brooklyn Nets are interested in adding Bradley Beal to their team this offseason, and all I could think was, duh. Of course, they're interested in adding Bradley Beal. Everyone is interested in adding Bradley Beal. Um, but they do not have the assets to add Bradley Beal. If I'm Washington, I know I can get better than what Brooklyn has to offer. Jarrett Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie, and some first round picks. There's definitely better. They can get better for that from someone else. I don't think the Lakers have what it takes to get him either. They've gave up a lot of what they had to offer in the trade to get Anthony Davis, which they had to do. You can't leave that up in the air like the Lakers did with Paul George. If they pull the trigger to get Paul George, they have him and LeBron right now instead of him and Anthony Davis, which in hindsight, you probably rather have Anthony Davis, who turned in an MVP caliber season this season himself, top 5 player in the league. Paul George, awesome player, but I don't think Paul George is on Anthony Davis's level. Um, I think Anthony Davis is the performer. I think he is a highlight reel, and you can put a value on that by what your ratings are when he plays versus when he doesn't play. You look at New Orleans ratings when he was there versus when he wasn't there. So that's the value he brings just in terms of marketability. Um, so Bradley Beal, there's a lot of spots he could make a move to where both teams do gain assets in that trade. The Knicks have an interesting package to offer teams for people. While I don't think it's quite enough to land Bradley Beal, I think it's interesting. I think they have packages they could include to get someone there. They're desperate for a star. I know they would love to add Chris Paul. I don't know that Chris Paul wants to go there. I don't know that most stars want to go there unless they're looking to do like what James Harden did and create their own brand there. James Harden going to Houston and making himself into a brand where he might not have had that opportunity had he stayed on Oklahoma City. So, I assume we'll see also division or standings change as well with this. So, right now, there's Milwaukee, who has all but secured first place. It would take a lot for the Raptors to overtake them for first. The Celtics are within 3 games of number 2 Toronto, Miami within 2 of Boston, Indiana within 2 of Miami, who are tied up with the Sixers. So, we could see some different matchups depending on how these last 8 games play out. I am interested to see because I think a lot of these teams that are now healthy that wouldn't have been had the season played out the way it normally would have. We're seeing different matchups that will play out differently now than they would have 2 months ago. Slippery cheeks, what's going on? Over in the West, LA's got it's 5 games up on the Clippers. Clippers coming back healthy will probably play guys back to back, so they do have a chance at that number 1 spot. Although I expect the Lakers fresh to close out the season strong. The one team I really want to talk about in all of this, rather than break down a lot of this boring possibilities. Oh, all right. We're going to call this a technical difficulty. I did not expect this to be so big. Something I've been telling everyone for a while. Don't sleep on the Oklahoma City Thunder. What this front office has done for the last 15 years has to be acknowledged. Has to be. They have done something that only few other teams have done. Uh, I would like to reference the Tampa Bay Devil Rays for an example of a small market team has a hard time drawing into interest from their local markets into their team, who have had a difficult time retaining their stars due to the fan base, due to their budget constraints, due to where they are located. But like the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, the Thunder have done something amazing. They have created a culture that knows how to rebound from a rebuild. You look back to draft, and very smartly, and probably a lot of luck involved too, drafting Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden in, I think that was 3 or 4 drafts, and Serge Ibaka in there as well. I mean, just one of the deepest draft histories to hit on, to be as well coached as they were, coaches that knew how to coach to the talent that was available on those teams. Um, the Devil Rays smartly trading players at their peak value to get more assets to then farm and cultivate and then trade away for more assets later. You see these articles of the Devil Rays making trades that last, for years and years and years after, 15 plus years. These trades have been providing results because of what they've done with those assets. So the Oklahoma City Thunder, they have to rebound from losing Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook. They had all three of those guys on one squad. They went to one NBA Finals with all three of them before losing them to in one to a trade, one to free agency, and another one to a trade to finish off this trio, exodus from Oklahoma City. And I think you could say that all three were amicable. James Harden wanting to go and create his own brand somewhere, done. Kevin Durant wanting to leave the shadow of Russell Westbrook, done. Went on to start his legacy somewhere else. Now with 2 championships under his belt, going to create his legacy now in Brooklyn with Kyrie Irving. So they lose all three of these players, but they smartly have set themselves up for success for the next 10, 15, 20 years by trading players that wanted out, by getting back only assets, trading those assets, and still having a team that is in 5th place in the West. In one offseason, they lost 2 all-star players, Russell Westbrook and Paul George. Paul George, widely considered a top 5 to top 10 player. Russell Westbrook considered a top 15 to 20 player at his lowest. They lose both of them, and they are still in 5th place in the West, the deep West. I think the only reason they are in 5th place in the West is one move in particular, was Chris Paul. They traded for a guy that has kept them competitive, has elevated the talent they have there on that team, and maintained his status as a valuable, expensive veteran that anyone would love to have. The New York Knicks have come out in wanting to be aggressive to acquire him. I don't think Chris Paul wants to go there, but it speaks volumes to what his value is to prospective teams that desperately need veteran leadership to transform a young roster into a team that's capable of being a championship contender for years. He was the glue that kept the Clippers together. He was the glue that kept the Hornets together. And he is now the glue that is keeping the Oklahoma City Thunder together. So if I'm Oklahoma City, with the draft capital I have coming up, I'm not motivated to move Chris Paul unless it is for an irresistible offer. There's nothing the Lakers have to offer outside of Kyle Kuzma that would intrigue me to want to move on from Chris Paul, because if I trade Chris Paul for Kyle Kuzma does not bring the veteran leadership that Chris Paul does that elevates my young talent coming in. But by retaining Chris Paul, I keep someone who's capable of grooming and grooming the talent that I'm bringing in, taking the load off of my head coach who already has to come up and formulate a game plan day in and day out for each team that they're facing, and takes on some of that responsibility himself and helps create a culture there in Oklahoma City of leadership and winning. And I think it would do wonders for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and his development. And I think that you can't there's no trade asset out there on the market to acquire Chris Paul that equals that value. Um, Speaking of KD and Kyrie not returning, again, want to emphasize that I think that's the best plan for both of them. There's nothing to gain by playing this season. Stay home, relax, play some pickup basketball, but don't return to these rigors until, training camp next year. Come back hungry and dominate for the next 4 or 5 years, because they're both definitely capable of doing that there in Brooklyn. I want to talk about my boy Zach LaVine. If we could all do something to get Zach LaVine help, to get the Chicago Bulls a coach for the young talent they have there. Zach LaVine desperately wants to win. He desperately wants to compete. He does not like losing. That's what you want from a player. If his talent, if his talents are wasted on coaches and teams that are not ready to win, it would be a tragedy. This guy is an absolute killer. This is the guy I want in my locker room. I don't care what anyone says. I want this kind of guy in my locker room to give everything he has, puts everything he has on the line to win day in and day out. I don't think the Lakers have what it takes to acquire this guy, but man, wouldn't he be something to cap off that what they have going there? Because if LeBron declines and in 2 years his time's up, you have Anthony Davis, Zach LaVine ready to pick up the torch. You add someone else in there and you continue on. I don't think LA has the assets to get Zach LaVine either, but that would be a dream scenario there. I don't know who else has the capital to go get him. Maybe Miami. I don't know that Miami has a spot on their roster for him, but I love what Miami has cooking there. That's a team that competes year in, year out with what they have. They haven't had successful drafts recently. No, I shouldn't say recently. They have only had draft success recently. Bam Adebayo. There are other young guys. Y'all know who I'm talking about. Actually, I want to go call them out by name. I was playing 2K with Kyron a couple days ago, and he chose someone. I told me to choose the Heat, and I was like, "You do not want me to play the Heat, bro." Kendrick Nunn, undrafted player. I don't even think Miami expected to get what they did out of him. Tyler Hero, didn't want to get him mixed up with the guy the Suns have, but Tyler Hero, absolute baller. To pick up Andre Iguodala was big, although it does kind of create a logjam at your 2-3. with what they already have on the roster. Duncan Robinson, another guy I don't think anyone expected to become the player that he has become. But they've done really well acquiring talent lately. I don't know if that speaks to player development or player acquisition, or both. But definitely have to give credit to what they have assembled here in Miami, and maybe that's a place Zach LaVine ends up because they can piece together something to trade to Chicago, make it worth it. Although I don't think Chicago ends up on the winning side of whatever trade comes out there. Headlines today: a judge has required Zion Williamson to appear in court regarding his eligibility at Duke University. I understand why this occurs. Why we go to court over this stuff, because we're talking about large amounts of money at play. That's why I guess Roger Clemens had to appear before Congress to discuss whether he had or had not done steroids. But there's not better uses of taxpayer money than to call in a 19-year-old kid to testify whether or not he received benefits to go to Duke University. We don't have better uses for that taxpayer money. That money can't go to education, transportation, roadways, inner cities, Flint, Michigan, Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the cities of New York or Los Angeles. That money cannot be better spent on those items than they are to be used to call in a 19-year-old kid to find out if he got money or benefits to go to Duke University. I think that it's the NCAA's job to decide how to handle that, considering it's their organization. If they have acquired government assistance in these issues and are paying for it, then I guess I would say that is, their choice how to spend that money. But if I'm all of these colleges that are under the NCAA, I disband. To say that this is what keeps these kids as amateurs is ridiculous. They are considered adults legally, and therefore, by playing a game that generates revenue for these schools, I would argue they are professionals. The only thing that makes them amateurs is the fact that they are not paid for what they do. That is literally the only difference. And to tell me these kids don't deserve a cut of billion-dollar revenues is ridiculous. Even if it's something as silly as $10,000 a year, and a college education, which don't get me started on how overpriced a college education is. You cannot tell me why kids have to go into hundreds of thousands of dollar debt to go to a university to get a better education. And the argument that you can get the same education at a lesser university for less money is ridiculous. Listen to what you're saying, that a lesser education at a lesser university is the same as getting an overpriced education at a bigger school is ridiculous. So these kids who are generating billions of dollars can't get a cut, can't get any kind of benefits for doing what they're doing. Absolutely ridiculous. And that's really all I had for sports today. We're obviously a little light on topics until sports return at the end of this month and next month. We'll still have the UFC fights every Saturday night for the foreseeable future. We do have some good fights coming up. Although none that I can think of off the top of my head that are um, anything to mention. Although now that I'm looking at it, I'm sure I'm about to regret saying that. Jessica I headlines next Saturday's fights.
Yeah, it looked like there was a little mouse on the wall.
Um, really, I'm not seeing a whole lot. I'm sure we're gonna get more. We're gonna get more fights announced um, in the near future. Because yeah, there's really not anything big I'm seeing until after June 20th. Nothing really big going on. So I think the return of the NBA, seeing who does want to return, which athletes decide to stay home, could affect a lot. Joe Ingles has come out of the Utah Jazz to say that he does not want to play, but are these athletes willing to leave that kind of money on the court? And does sentiment towards the coronavirus change between now and then? Definitely, I don't think anyone would have felt comfortable going back to play 2 months ago. But now, a lot of players, a lot of people are saying that it is safe to go outside, safe to resume life. So, it's not crazy to think that in 30 days, 45 days, when play resumes, that sentiment towards coming outside again might change. Um, yeah, not much else to really talk about. I don't know that we have time to really get into um, a lot of um, the stuff out in the world. I really had wanted to have more of the DNA podcast crew here before I start delving into a lot of that, but definitely want to say that it's important that we keep open minds during this time. Um, Empathy is really the key here. A lot of people having a difficult time empathizing with their fellow humans, and that is a problem. That is what has to change. If you can't empathize with people, then you are part of the problem. Um, even if you don't agree, you still have to empathize with this. So, we'll probably dive a lot more into that next week when we have the whole crew here. Do want to tell everyone, please stay safe out there. Take care of yourselves. Check in on your neighbors. We're all in this together. Um, Here's to the rest of 2020 being a little bit kinder on us.